What is up, you guys? So I've gotten a few requests on this, and I finally decided to do a tutorial on this. Um, so what this is, it's what I call ghetto mastering. So that's what I figured that some of you guys wanted to know. So I'm going to show you what ghetto mastering is. Now, let me quickly explain that this is not mastering. This is not real mastering. This is not something you can do to your own tracks and then release it and expect it to sound as good as professional mastered songs. I mean, they could be as loud as those, but they're not going to have that same dynamic range and that same, that same mastering quality that allows that music to be done once and for all, and it's perfect, and at least sonically, and it's ready to be played in any format. But what ghetto mastering is, why it exists, it's, sometimes we just want to throw something out on SoundCloud or just hear it in our cars real quick, and it's just a quick, for me, I made a rack of my my ghetto mastering group thing, so I made a little Ableton rack, so I just throw it on the end of things when I just want to quickly bounce it and hear it in my car, or throw something on SoundCloud when I don't want to pay $100 or $200 per track to send it to a mastering engineer. Now, the difference between this kind of mastering, ghetto mastering, I'm always going to keep calling it that because it's not mastering. What this is for is just to make it much, much louder and kind of push that signal to be loud. Real mastering, at least I don't trust those other guys that charge $20 to master a song or whatever, those websites that everyone has, to do mastering. All they're doing is they're working inside their computer just like me and probably doing this same shit. So they're really ghetto mastering you, but charging you $20 to do it. So when I pay to get a song mastered, it goes, I pay a little bit more, but I'm being ensured that's done by professionals, done it for years and years and years, has proper mastering gear like analog summing and proper mastering compression and limiters and EQs and pieces of gear like analog gear that costs $8,000 or more just to do one thing. Like, that's the art of mastering. So again, this is just a quick thing that you can do to just make your tracks louder for yourself, but this is no way to encourage you to not send your tracks to a mastering engineer when it's time to do that, because you shouldn't be mastering your own tracks anyway. That's like a common known rule for music making in any genre. You can mix your own music once you mix it all down from the writing session, which that's what we're looking at today. But when it after that, you can mix it and all that, but you shouldn't master it because you need that other pair of ears to hear it, and that kind of collaboration with another person before you send it out into the world for everyone to hear. And people are judgmental, and believe it or not, common listeners have that ear that can tell the difference between something like a ghetto mastered song and something that's well done. Anyway, so I'll show you guys how to do this. It's really easy. So to ghetto master my writing session that's not even being mixed, I do all the typical things I do in mixing, and I have a little bit of that going on here, but it needs further compression and that kind of stuff. So for me, I just wanted to put this in my car, listen to it just to make sure it sounds alright. So I go to my master, I just throw this this chain here, which I grabbed from my Ableton Live rack, so it's probably called ghetto mastering or something like that. And before I do that, or actually I always do this anyway, even before I do this, is I listen to the whole track and make sure it doesn't go over -3 dB or -6 dB, anywhere in that range. But usually nowadays I push it to -3 dB, and that's because when I mix it all down into stems and into audio files so that I can mix it in Pro Tools, that's just the volume I need it to be, the whole mix, at around -3 dB at its peak. So that's as loud as it can be, and I apply the same rule here when I throw on this mastering. That's just because we need the headroom on our master before we, completely just squash it. So anyway, so now let's get into this. I know I've talked a long time, and I always hate talking too much. I wish I could make things shorter and simpler, but I just talk. So anyway, let's turn this on, and or let's listen to it real quick. It's really quiet now with this. It's loud again. So the first thing I do is I throw on this preset of this compressor, mixed gel. So it's, if you go to audio effects, you go to compressor, you'll see mixed gel somewhere in here. And I like this preset because the attack right here you can see is it's not a very quick attack, so it doesn't compress our our beginning transients and attacks. It kind of lets those breathe a little and allows things to be more dynamic. So if you're gonna do your own settings, for something like this that's kind of like a bus compressor, you want to make sure your attack is slightly past 10 milliseconds. Auto release will be fine. It's kind of got that 1.5 ratio, so it's not like it's a hard compression that's happening, and you can see that the threshold's really far down, but we're not getting a lot of gain reduction because of our ratio. So that's kind of what I like about this preset. So this is pretty much what I would kind of do myself. So I mean, instead of having me to do it, I could just quickly click on this preset. I could save my own version of that preset by clicking on this box, but we don't need to do that. And let's see. Okay, so that's the first thing I do. Then I do a little bit of multi-band compression. This one is a little outdated. I need to switch this multi-band compression setting to something better. I mean, all I'm doing here is I'm just bringing up the inputs on all the bands up 5 dB, and slightly bringing down some of them here, or bringing them up, I mean, here. And I cut the amount to 45%. So I'm kind of not using this multi-band compressor setting, or what I'm doing with this multi-band compressor is not very typical and not exactly the way that I approach multi-band compression nowadays. This is kind of an old rack, so I definitely could update this. But with the multi-band compression, what that allows you to do is split up the signal into different frequencies and compress them differently. So you can see that this is like on the low band we got this set to everything beneath 98 hertz, and then the mid is everything between 98 and 1K, and I put a soft knee, I think. So later on I'll do a multi-band compression video, a really in-depth explanation of how to use everything in here, and what you should be trying to do with a multi-band compressor. So this is not a good example, but this is what I throw into this rack, and it serves its purpose here. Then I use a glue compressor, so you can see that this is just a lot of compression, and I use the setting. Yes, I use the setting again. I use the make it loud, and this one now has a very quick attack, automatic release, a ratio of 10, and I don't know if you guys know this, but what all limiters are just compressors that are set to the ratio of 100. So if you go above, some people say that if you start to compress at a ratio of 10 or greater, that's technically limiting. Well, engineers kind of fight over this, because some will say that it is and some will say that it isn't, because limiters are the ratio of 100 or whatever. So what that means is the ratio means when something's louder than the threshold, then it gets compressed down in that ratio or whatever. So I don't even know why I'm explaining all this. Anyway, so I put the clip on soft, or actually that's what the preset is. Threshold's around -12. Makeup is around 4 dB, just to compensate for whatever gain reduction. You can see that that's a little bit too much makeup for what's being compressed. So it's kind of really just making it louder with the makeup gain. So again, it's just a setting to make it loud, and I'm okay with that. So yeah, and then I have a S1 imager here, and what that is doing here is I have my width set to 1.5, and that's pretty much it. And why I do this is because when we in Pro Tools, if I'm not using sums and analog sums to sum up my signal to make it sound nice and wide and warm and all that, it's gonna sound very digital and kind of the more tracks and the more plugins you use, what tends to happen in digital mixing and all that kind of stuff, the sound kind of becomes a little bit more put together and a little bit more squashed, and it kind of loses that stereo wideness. So I always throw on or I'll try to find a way to reintroduce some stereo width at the end. So what this is doing, it's compensating for the digital realm's natural tendency to make things slightly more put together and kind of more mono, but that's not really the word I want to use. So I throw this on there to add that width again, and you'll see that typically with people that mix inside of Ableton or whatever, that they'll throw utility onto their mastering chain. So utility is I mean, if you don't have the S1 imager, I suppose the utility would be fine to use. I don't really like using it because the S1 imager is much better, but what you could do is add just 150% of width, but then realize everything is going to become slightly wider. So that's kind of why I don't like this, where the S1 imager is kind of a better algorithm. And let's see. Then last but not least, what you always have to have on a mastering chain or a Ghetto mastering chain is a limiter. So I set my ceiling to negative 0.3 dB, and then I bring the gain up to 7.9 dB, or you could put it to 8, maybe 9. And if you still have a lot of headroom, maybe you can go a little further than that, but I usually don't like to go past 9. In most cases, I stay underneath 7, but above 5 dB. And here's another thing I forgot to mention about Ghetto mastering. Another reason why you would want to use a Ghetto mastering chain in your writing session, like I sometimes and most of the times do, it's because it's not uncommon for people to write into a mastering chain just to, you know, have things sound good and big because of this chain here, because everything's squashed together, that things will start to sound good to me and I won't have to focus on mixing when I'm writing, and so I won't think about it. And then when I turn this off and I delete it out of here, then I can start mixing down everything and making it sound better. And then in my mixing session, that's when I get it to sound really much bigger than this hack of a trick, and then I can master it properly or send it off to get mastered properly. So a lot of producers will sometimes, you know, have something like this in their writing session just to make a song into. So it's kind of like you're working into a limiter. And anyway, that can tell you things like sometimes I listen to this on my writing session, and I can tell what things will get squashed and lost in the mix down stage and in the mixing stage and the mastering stage. So this is kind of a way for me to check before I go into the next stage what needs to be compressed more, what needs to be brought out more. And this is kind of a great way to mix too before you get to the mixing stage, or, you know, kind of a way to tweak things so that you're sure that they're going to be in the mix. But again, I've been kind of doing this for a while, so I kind of know what to listen for. So I don't really recommend that this is a habit that newer producers should start doing. This is kind of a habit that can be deceptive as well as it is helpful. So it's not all pros and cons using something like this. It's not all pros, it's pros and cons. I don't know what I was trying to say there. So anyway, that's Ghetto mastering. I've kind of explained a lot about it in terms of its uses and some of its cons and what it's mainly for. It's just a quick way to get a mix to sound loud, and I also use it to check that the signal can take that squashing and still sound dynamic and all that. So I kind of use it also to make sure that all this will still sound dynamic by the end of it, because if I'm squashing something too much here, then when I turn this on, it's going to be obvious. And if on the other side of that, if something's too soft and it gets lost as soon as I turn this on, then I know that it needs to be beefed up. Like if I take this part right here, let's just that to me sounded fine before I started adding before I added on the multi-band compressor, and before I added this on and brought the the fader position up a bit, I thought it was gonna sit fine in the mix. Hold on, I don't know why. So before it was actually slightly quieter than that, and it was nice to me. I liked it there. But as soon as I tested it with this, it got buried down and lost, and with the sidechain compression going on there as well, or I'm not sure if I did that. I think it got lost because of the sidechain compressor, and it wasn't really in the way of the kick, so I had to remove that, and it now fits in when it's all squashed. So that's kind of a way to check things also. So that's it, you guys. I'll be doing another tutorial today or tomorrow, most likely today, just because I want to get that video out of the way on multiband compression using the stock Ableton multiband, and I'm going to show you guys what all the parameters does and how to use it and all that stuff. So anyway, lates, you guys.